Welcome to part 3 of my experience at a wedding in India. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, I'll link them. Make sure you do, because otherwise you're probably going to be a little bit confused. And welcome. My name is Traveling Cannonball, and I run the travel agency, the Traveling Cannonball. And I recently got the chance to go to the wedding of 2 friends of mine in India. And so that's what we're talking about. We're now at the reception. So after having gotten left at the church, I rode in the car to the reception with the bride and groom. And because I was worried about getting out of the car with the bride and groom, when the car got stuck in a little bit of traffic waiting for people to clear through the carport, I got out. The driver was telling me no to wait, but I was like, no, I just don't feel comfortable getting out with the bride and groom. And so I went ahead and got out. And then the first thing at the carport, there was a table. And at this table, they were giving a drink. I'm not quite sure what this drink was. I had a lot of interesting drinks in India, and a lot of times I wasn't completely sure what they were. This one seemed kind of like a cross between lemonade and tea, or maybe just a different kind of lemonade. And then there was something else that kind of looked like incense. I'm not exactly sure what that was. So if you were at the wedding, or even if you weren't, but you have more familiarity, wow, that word's hard to say, drop in the comments what that was, because I would love to know. And so then I walked into the reception hall, which thankfully was air conditioned. The other foreign guests were already there, and the ladies had gotten little bindies from the Indian women that had ridden with them in the van. I was a little bit disappointed because I didn't. And the other thing is, though, as I walked in, I was surprised. So the reception hall was absolutely gorgeous. There was a stage with the same couch from the reception, and then there were flowers all along the front of the stage, on the floor of the stage, and a curtain of flowers with chandeliers hanging down, and there was a light with the bride and groom's name made into the light that was hanging behind, and there was a table with an absolutely gorgeous wedding cake, and then along the walls there were pink lights shining up the walls to give more ambiance. And then there were chair covers. Now, the bride and groom told me that actually the hall had to do some electrical work because the lighting in the hall had been very glaring and everything was on one light. So they weren't able to turn off some of the lights, and they didn't have those pink lights or anything on the sides. Those were all added by the bride and groom. According to them, most of the weddings only decorate the stage and they don't worry about the rest of the reception hall. And they wanted to decorate all of it. Now, that was not the whole hall. I could tell that there was more over further, but I didn't at first know what was going on. So I came in and I had a seat, and of course right behind me the bride and groom came in because we arrived in the same car, and they went up to the stage, and then there were several speakers who went up to the stage, and I'm like, well, this is interesting. There are no tables in here. Everything's set up in rows like a ceremony. And now there's speakers on the stage. Most of what they said was in Tamil, so I don't actually know what they said. I think some of it was in English. I don't remember very well. And I'm like, well, since only close relatives go to the wedding, maybe they do some other kind of ceremony in here. It wasn't a whole lot, and then they announced that it was time to eat and that you would eat by groups. Now, I did already know that Indians come to the reception in waves. A lot of times you'll have a lot of people at the wedding. Now, this wedding didn't have that many people because the bride, being American, only had 5 representatives. And so at the end, the count showed that 375 people had eaten. The bride and groom ended up not eating. I'll tell you about that in a bit. And so to me, that feels like a really large wedding. But later, when I was talking to my tour guide in Mumbai, he was like, oh no, that is so small, even with the bride not contributing. He's like, my cousin's wedding had 2,000 people. And so you can see with these large numbers why they need to eat in groups. But nonetheless, I was a little confused. I'm like, how do you know what group? But the bride had told me that we were going to eat at the end with her, so we just sat and were watching. So they started off taking some photos of the bride and the groom on the stage in the reception hall, and then they had parents come up, and then all of a sudden they're calling the rest of the foreign guests up to join them on the stage. And a couple of us that are not relatives at all, we were feeling really uncomfortable. We're like, we're not relatives, we're not family. And they're like, no, come on, come on. So we came up and, just felt really uncomfortable. But what we didn't know was these photos aren't just about the families. This was actually a photo with friends. So what happens as the wedding proceeds, or the reception proceeds, is the bride and groom stayed on the stage for 3 hours. And throughout this whole 3 hours, different guests would all come up and greet them, congratulate them on their wedding. Some of them would hand them presents, which they didn't open, they just set aside. And more of them would hand them envelopes with cash in it. And they took photos after photos after photos. And the time is going by, and now it's pretty late in the afternoon. I think it's like 2 o'clock. And I'm pretty hungry. The wedding had been scheduled for 10 a.m. So, we'd left the hotel at 9 something in the morning. And I'm really starting to wonder. A lot of people have left. I've talked to a lot of people, which was really awesome. The Indian families and friends and everybody that I met were just so welcoming, even the ones that I really couldn't speak with. And the people kept asking me if I've eaten, and I'm like, well, the bride says we're going to eat at the end with them. And then the groom's family are starting to get worried about this. Matter of fact, the groom's sister-in-law, she's going, you really need to eat. And finally, the groom's brother and sister-in-law kind of take matters into their own hands. They go and arrange that the foreigners are going to go and eat. So we go into the second room. Now, this room wasn't decorated at all. In talking with the bride and groom, they don't decorate this room. It's just not what you do. The bride had wanted to decorate it. After all, being an American, she wanted like centerpieces and stuff at the tables, but it doesn't work that way. The tables were long, skinny tables, and people only sat on one side of the table, and then they would cover the table with paper, and then on top of the paper they would put banana leaves, and these banana leaves were your plate. I know when I first posted about it, my parents were debating. My dad thought you just ate off of the banana leaf, and my mom thought you rolled it up and ate the banana leaf, and I was like, no, it's just the plate. I was told in the north they actually use plates, but in the south the banana leaf is the tradition. And so these big banana leaves go out on the table, and then the servers are coming with silver buckets of food and ladles. And so they put biryani onto the plate. That's the browner looking rice. And then I'm not sure if the whiter one is palau or something else. I'm not fully familiar with all of these. And then you can see there are 2 different curries. I didn't manage to get a picture of the fish fingers. Apparently they ran so low on fish fingers, I think they were actually cooking up some fish fingers for us, because my fish fingers came out and they were so hot I couldn't even eat them at first. And then there was a little cup of something that was like a porridge. If I had to guess, I would guess it was a corn porridge. Again, if there's anybody watching who knows what that was, please tell me in the comments. I would appreciate it. And then they did have a bottle of water as well. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, Indians usually eat with their hands, but for us foreigners, they did have utensils on hand so that we didn't have to eat with our hands. Now, earlier, when people had been eating, they got their dessert, I believe, at another station, but ours was actually brought to us. We had ice cream and we also had cake. Now, the cake was apparently a little bit unusual. This was something the bride had really pushed for. Now, there was a cake out on the stage that I mentioned, but then they also had sheet cakes, and these sheet cakes were pre-cut up into individual slices and put into boxes with a wooden spoon taped on top. But as I mentioned in the last video, these were not Indian style cakes. Like at the reception, these were an American style cake. So they're thicker, they're sweeter, and they have a buttercream frosting on them. Apparently the groom's father thought people weren't gonna like them, but they all got eaten. People appeared to actually really like it. It was something different and unusual. And then when I came back out after eating, the bride and groom were actually speaking to his grandmother, and I got the opportunity to talk to her and meet her. I don't know if she understood English or not. I'm guessing not, given her age, and I'm not sure if the groom did any translation into Tamil. She did say something to me, but she was so old and frail, her voice was so low that especially in this large reception room, I couldn't understand her. At this point, the photo taking is finally starting to wind down, and they go to cut the cake. Now, we heard a few different things after the wedding, and neither the bride nor I think, are completely sure of when the Indians typically cut the cake and who actually gets the cake. She was told only close family eat the cake, but then later we were told the cake's cut at the beginning, but they cut it at the end, and so that may have been a little bit different. One of the things that was definitely different from an American wedding, though, is it wasn't just the bride and the groom up on the stage cutting the cake. The groom's parents and the bride's parents were all up there. Now, the bride being American, she also wanted a more traditional photo, so after they all cut the cake together, then she kicked the parents out and they pretended to cut the cake again with just the two of them. Now, the bride had prepared a second dress and she wanted to take more photos in this dress, and so she and I went to change. And as we were changing, the groom came in. Well, I wasn't changing, she was changing. I was helping her change. As I was helping her change, the groom came in and he was like, "You gotta hurry up, there's another bride here." So we didn't really get a lot of photos there. But before we move on to after the wedding reception, I should state another thing that was unusual to me. So there were gifts for the guests. Now, I've seen that before. That's not unusual. And they were in these cute bags. They had the bride and groom's name and their wedding date and everything. But inside was a coconut, a betel leaf, and a little snack. And I tried and tried and tried to get the meaning behind this. I asked the groom, then I asked all of his cousins. We had a big dinner with all of his cousins. And then I was speaking to a tour guide when I went down to Madurai, and the tour guide was like, "No, there is no meaning behind it." I still don't understand if there's no meaning why the leaf, but apparently the coconut is just something useful. And I know the leftovers were going to be given to the family's employees, their housekeeper, gardener, I don't know what all employees they had. So then after the ceremony, we went back to the groom's family's home, and there were several things that happened there. The first thing is they did another welcoming ceremony like they had done at the bridal shower. And then afterwards, when we were in the house, there was a time with some more prayers. Now, these prayers were entirely in Tamil, so I didn't understand them. And then the bride had to light a lantern. And so her father-in-law explained that the lighting of this lantern symbolized her passing on the faith and family values to the next generation. Beyond that, we just kind of hung out at the house and chilled. The bride and groom got some of the leftover food because they had not managed to eat at the wedding. And we snacked on some of the cake, and then we actually cut up the cake. The cake never got served at the wedding, especially because there was that other bride coming in. And so then people were even kind of looking at this big round cake going, how do we cut this? And I was like, hey, I'm a master cake cutter. I cut cake at my cousin's wedding. And so at first I was just cutting up cake for certain people. And then in the end, I ended up cutting up the whole bottom layer of the cake. And we put it into boxes that some of them the bride kept and snacked on for a while. I got some. I think her family and other friends got some. And then I also know more was given out to other relatives. A lot of people had really liked the cake at the reception, and so they wanted more of the cake. One of the neighbors came over to congratulate. She'd been at the wedding, but they also, when she came over to the house to offer more congratulations, gave her a box of the cake. And so that really was the end of the ceremony. I know that's different than some of the things you may have heard about Indian weddings. I know as I was preparing to go to India, people kept talking about a lot of things, including multiple days. And I'm pretty sure that's a Hindu wedding, and India is very diverse. This appears to be the very typical Catholic wedding. Matter of fact, the groom has a cousin who is getting married very soon. Her engagement is coming up, and then in a couple of months later will be her ceremony. And as far as I can tell, it'll be pretty similar to this one, because while there were some American traditions brought in, a lot of this still was the Indian wedding. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you will subscribe and click that like button. And if you're looking to plan a trip to India, Alaska, or an international destination, I mean, I know Alaska's not and India is, but the Traveling Cannonball specializes on Alaska and international destinations, so India falls into that category. Our contact information is down below. We would love to help you with that. And make sure you tune in for our future videos. Next week, we're going to talk about what you can eat in India if you don't like curry. So until next time, bye.